But things went wrong. What happened? Kennedy asked. The man who grabbed Small, his name was Patrick Brennan, he panicked. Small fought back harder than expected. There was a struggle. Brennan hit him, maybe harder than he intended. Small went down. By the time we got there to help, Small wasn't moving. We checked, he was dead. What did you do with the body? O'Malley closed his eyes. We buried it, far outside the city, on a piece of land nobody ever visits. I can't tell you exactly where. I was just the driver, I wasn't involved in the actual burial. But it's somewhere north of Toronto, in the countryside. What about Patrick Brennan? Where can I find him? Dead. He died in 1921, killed in a factory accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident. Some of us thought he was murdered because he knew too much. But either way, he can't tell you anything now. Kennedy spent hours with O'Malley, pressing for details, trying to verify the story. But O'Malley's account was frustratingly vague. He couldn't provide the exact location of the burial. He couldn't name other members of the group. He claimed they'd used false names and he'd only met them once or twice. The whole story had the feel of something half-remembered or half-invented. O'Malley died 3 days after giving his statement, taking whatever additional information he might have had to his grave. Kennedy returned to Toronto and tried to verify the confession, but he couldn't. Patrick Brennan had indeed died in 1921, but there was no evidence connecting him to Small. No witnesses remembered seeing Brennan near the Grand Opera House on December 2, 1919. No one in Toronto's labor movement, when questioned, admitted knowing anything about a plan to kidnap Small. Was O'Malley's confession genuine, or was it another false lead in a case full of them? Kennedy was inclined to believe that O'Malley had been telling at least a partial truth. The specificity of certain details suggested inside knowledge. But without corroboration, without any way to verify the claims or locate the supposed burial site, the confession was ultimately just another dead end. December 2, 1926, marked 7 years since Ambrose Small's disappearance. Under Canadian law, he could now be declared legally dead, and his estate could finally be settled. Teresa Small, now 61 years old and living in a modest apartment, filed the necessary papers with the court. The process was complicated by the passage of time and the various legal claims against the estate, but by mid-1927, the court had made its ruling. Ambrose Small was legally dead as of December 2, 1919. His estate could be probated. The final accounting of Small's wealth revealed something surprising. Despite the fortune he'd accumulated, despite the $1.7 million sale of his theater empire, the estate's net value was far less than expected. Legal fees, outstanding debts, the costs of maintaining properties during the 7-year limbo, and various claims against the estate had eaten away at the fortune. When everything was settled, Teresa Small inherited approximately $300,000, a substantial sum, but far from the millions many had assumed she would receive. For Teresa, the declaration of death brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the legal limbo was finally over, that she could close this chapter of her life. But sorrow too, because it meant accepting once and for all that Ambrose was gone, that she would never know what had happened to him. Inspector Kennedy, now retired from the police force, followed the probate proceedings with interest. For him, the declaration of legal death felt like an admission of defeat. In 8 years of investigation, he had pursued hundreds of leads, interviewed thousands of witnesses, explored every theory from kidnapping to staged disappearance to murder. And yet he was no closer to the truth than he had been on December 4, 1919, when Teresa Small first reported her husband missing. He had his suspicions, of course. He believed Small had been murdered, probably by someone he knew. The evidence pointed to something that had happened quickly, unexpectedly, perhaps even accidentally. But who and where was the body? These questions would haunt Kennedy for the rest of his life. The newspapers marked the 7-year anniversary with retrospective articles, rehashing the details of the case, speculating once again about what might have happened. Public interest in the mystery had not waned. If anything, the declaration of legal death reignited fascination with the case. True crime writers published books about the disappearance. Playwrights wrote dramas inspired by it. The vanishing of Ambrose Small had become a permanent part of Canadian folklore. But for Teresa, it was time to move on. She sold the last of the properties she'd inherited, settled remaining debts, and donated a portion of the money to Catholic charities. She had never remarried, never spoken publicly in detail about her husband or their marriage. She chose instead to live quietly, privately, guarding her memories and her dignity. In 1930, during renovations at the Grand Opera House, workers made a discovery that briefly reignited interest in the case. Behind a section of plaster in a backstage corridor, they found a small folded note tucked into a gap between the wall studs. The note was written in pencil on cheap paper, now yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. It read, "If something happens to me, investigate JD. He knows more than he's saying. The bonds were never meant for tea. This was always about the money. A.S." The workers immediately called the police. The note appeared to be signed with Ambrose Small's initials, and if genuine, it suggested that Small had anticipated danger. But who was JD? John Doughty, the secretary? And what did the cryptic reference to the bonds mean? Handwriting experts were brought in to examine the note. Their conclusion was inconclusive. The writing could be Small's, but the sample was too small and too distorted by the hurried nature of the writing to make a definitive determination. It could also have been forged, either as a prank or as a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators. The reference to JD seemed to point to John Doughty, but Doughty had been investigated thoroughly, tried and acquitted, and had lived quietly since 1920 without any further connection to the case. When police interviewed him again, Doughty insisted he knew nothing about any note and suggested it was either a forgery or a misunderstanding. "If Mr. Small had suspected me of anything," Doughty said, "why would he have entrusted me with those bonds? It makes no sense." This was a fair point. If Small had feared Doughty, his actions on December 2, 1919, leaving Doughty alone in the office, giving him access to valuable bonds, made no sense. Unless Small hadn't written the note at all, or unless JD referred to someone else entirely. Investigators tried to identify other people with the initials JD who might have been connected to Small. They found several: a business associate named James Davidson, a theater manager named Joseph Drury, a lawyer named Jonathan Dempsey. Each was investigated. None showed any connection to Small's disappearance or any motive for harm. The note remained a mystery within a mystery. Had Small written it? If so, when? And had it actually been hidden in the wall before his disappearance? Or had someone planted it there years later? There was no way to know. The discovery did, however, remind people that the Grand Opera House itself might still hold secrets. Over the years since the disappearance, there had been periodic searches of the building, but it was a large structure with many rooms, storage areas, and hidden spaces. Could there be other clues waiting to be found? Could Small's body itself be hidden somewhere in the building? In 1931, the Grand Opera House underwent a major renovation that involved stripping the interior down to the studs. This provided an opportunity for the most thorough search of the building ever conducted. Police officers and volunteers spent weeks examining every space, every cavity, every possible hiding place. They found nothing related to Ambrose Small. No body, no additional notes, no evidence of violence or concealment. If the theater held secrets, they remained hidden. In 1935, nearly 16 years after Small's disappearance, an elderly woman named Margaret Kelly contacted Toronto police with new information. She explained that she had been suffering from memory problems in recent years, but something had suddenly come back to her. Something she'd witnessed on December 2, 1919. Detective James Morrison, who had taken over the Small case after Kennedy's retirement, met with Mrs. Kelly at her home. She was in her 70s now, frail but sharp-minded in the moment. "I saw Mr. Small that night," she said. "I'm certain of it. It was around 6 o'clock, maybe a little after. I was walking home from my sister's house on Adelaide Street." "Where did you see him?" Morrison asked. "He was getting into an automobile. A large black car, very nice. There were 2 men with him. They didn't force him, he got in willingly. But there was something about the way it happened that struck me as odd. The men seemed tense, urgent. Mr. Small looked troubled. "Can you describe these men?" Mrs. Kelly closed her eyes, trying to bring back the memory. One was tall, well-dressed, in his 40s perhaps. Dark coat, dark hat. The other was younger, stockier. I didn't get a good look at his face. "Why didn't you report this in 1919? Morrison asked gently. "I didn't realize it was important. I read about Mr. Small's disappearance in the newspaper, but by then several days had passed. And I kept thinking, he got into the car willingly. It must have been people he knew. I thought the police would find him quickly, that it would all be resolved. By the time I realized how serious it was, months had passed. I was afraid to come forward. I thought no one would believe me after so long. And why are you coming forward now? Because I'm old, detective. I don't have much time left. And I've been thinking about that night for years. It haunts me. What if those men harmed him? What if my silence has kept justice from being served? I had to tell someone, even if it's too late to matter." Morrison took detailed notes. He asked Mrs. Kelly to describe the exact location where she'd seen this encounter. He asked about the make of the car, though she couldn't identify it beyond saying it was large and black. He asked if she'd seen anything else, which direction the car had gone, whether there had been anyone else nearby who might have witnessed the scene. Mrs. Kelly had no additional details. The memory, long buried, had surfaced in fragments. Morrison thanked her for coming forward and promised to investigate. But investigating a 16-year-old sighting was nearly impossible. The location Mrs. Kelly described was a busy corner in 1919. Dozens of cars might have been there that evening. Even if her memory was accurate, even if she had seen Small getting into a car, it was impossible to identify whose car it had been or who the men were. Morrison did his best. He reviewed old traffic records, interviewed people who had worked in the area in 1919, tried to identify anyone who owned a large black car. But it led nowhere. Too much time had passed. Too many records had been lost or destroyed. Too many potential witnesses had moved away or died. Mrs. Kelly's testimony did, however, support the theory that Small had met with someone after leaving the Grand Opera House. If her memory was accurate, Small had encountered these men within half an hour of leaving his office. Were they business associates? Friends? Enemies? The answer remained elusive. Florence Small, Ambrose's sister, never wavered in her conviction that Teresa had been responsible for her brother's death. Even after Teresa's death in 1941, Florence continued to speak publicly about her suspicions, giving interviews to newspapers and crime writers. In a 1942 interview, Florence laid out her complete theory. She believed that Teresa had hired someone to kill Ambrose on December 2, 1919. The murderer had been waiting near the Grand Opera House, had intercepted Ambrose as he left, and had taken him somewhere to kill him. The body had been disposed of so skillfully that it was never found. Teresa was a clever woman, Florence said. She knew that without a body, it would be difficult to prove murder. She planned it carefully. She gave herself an alibi by being home that evening. She ensured that Ambrose's disappearance would look mysterious, inexplicable. And she waited patiently for 7 years to claim her inheritance. Journalists asked Florence for evidence. She had none beyond her own convictions and her interpretation of Teresa's behavior. She pointed to Teresa's composure, to the fact that the marriage had been troubled, to the financial motive. But these were circumstantial observations, not proof. Detective Morrison, still nominally in charge of the case even though it received little active investigation by the 1940s, was asked about Florence's theory. He acknowledged that Teresa had been a person of interest in the original investigation, but said that she had been thoroughly investigated and cleared. Mrs. Small had an alibi for the evening of December 2nd, Morrison said. She was at home with household staff. Several servants confirmed this. She couldn't have physically abducted or harmed her husband, and we found no evidence that she hired anyone to do so. No suspicious payments, no contacts with criminals, nothing that would suggest a murder-for-hire plot. But Florence was unmoved by this. "Of course there's no evidence," she said. "That's the point." Teresa was too clever to leave evidence. This kind of circular reasoning frustrated investigators. It was impossible to disprove a theory based entirely on the absence of evidence. If someone was clever enough, careful enough, they could commit a perfect crime. But that didn't mean every unsolved crime was the result of such cleverness. The public remained divided. Some believed Florence's accusations. Others thought she was a bitter woman unable to accept that her brother's disappearance might never be explained. The debate continued in letters to newspapers, in conversations at dinner parties, in late-night discussions among true crime enthusiasts. What was undeniable was that the mystery of Ambrose Small had taken on a life of its own, independent of the actual facts. It had become a canvas onto which people projected their own beliefs about wealth, marriage, justice, and the nature of truth itself. During World War II, the case of Ambrose Small faded from public consciousness. There were more immediate concerns, the war effort rationing news from overseas. Detective Morrison retired in 1943, and the case file was placed in archives, officially still open but realistically dormant. However, the war years did produce one potential lead, though it went nowhere. In 1944, a Canadian soldier serving in England wrote to Toronto police claiming that he'd met a man in a London pub who might have been Ambrose Small. The man was in his 70s, Canadian by accent, and when the soldier mentioned Toronto, the man had reacted strangely, becoming agitated and quickly leaving the pub. The letter was investigated as thoroughly as wartime circumstances allowed. British police made inquiries, but they couldn't locate the man the soldier had described. London in 1944 was full of displaced people, refugees, servicemen from across the Commonwealth. One elderly Canadian among thousands was impossible to track down. Even if the man had been found, the likelihood of him being Ambrose Small was minimal. Small would have been 81 years old in 1944. He would have had to live in hiding for 25 years, abandoning his fortune, his identity, everything he'd worked for. It seemed improbable to the point of impossibility. Yet the letter was filed with the case documents, another piece in the vast puzzle that refused to reveal its complete picture. In the 1950s, a true crime writer named Catherine Morrison, no relation to Detective Morrison, became obsessed with the Small case. She spent 5 years researching it, interviewing everyone still alive who had any connection to the disappearance, reviewing every document she could access, and attempting to construct a definitive account. Her book, The Man Who Vanished, The Ambrose Small Mystery, was published in 1956 and became a bestseller in Canada. In it, Morrison proposed a new theory. She believed that Small had been accidentally killed during a failed kidnapping attempt, not by political radicals as Thomas O'Malley had claimed, but by common criminals who had heard about the theater sale and seen Small as a target for ransom. Morrison's theory was that these criminals had abducted Small on the evening of December 2nd, intending to hold him until his family paid a ransom. But something had gone wrong during the abduction. Perhaps Small had a heart attack or stroke from the stress, or perhaps he'd been accidentally injured during the initial capture. Finding themselves with a dead hostage instead of a live one, the kidnappers had panicked and disposed of the body, likely in Lake Ontario. The theory was plausible and accounted for many of the known facts. It explained why no ransom demand was ever received. The kidnappers never had the chance to make one. It explained the lack of body. It had been disposed of in deep water. It explained the absence of witnesses to violence. Whatever had happened quickly and quietly. But like all theories about the case, it lacked definitive proof. Morrison could point to circumstantial evidence, to logical deductions, to what seemed likely given the circumstances. But she couldn't prove what had actually happened. The book reignited public interest in the case. People wrote letters to newspapers with their own theories. Amateur detectives tried to follow up on old leads. One man claimed to have found bones on a farm north of Toronto that might be Small's. They turned out to be from a large dog. For a few years in the late 1950s, it seemed like the case might break open. New witnesses came forward with memories from 1919. Old evidence was re-examined with more modern forensic techniques. But ultimately, nothing changed. The mystery remained a mystery. In 1962, During excavation for a new office building in downtown Toronto, construction workers discovered human remains. The bones were old, buried deeply, wrapped in what appeared to be canvas or heavy cloth that had mostly rotted away. The location was only 3 blocks from where the Grand Opera House had stood. The theater itself had been demolished in 1927. Police immediately wondered if this might finally be Ambrose Small. Forensic experts examined the remains. They determined that the bones were from a male, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, middle-aged at the time of death. This matched Small's general description. But there were problems. The remains included a skull with intact teeth, and dental records still existed for Ambrose Small. When forensic dentists compared the skull to Small's dental records, they found no match. The teeth patterns were completely different. These bones belonged to someone else. Carbon dating and other forensic tests suggested the remains had been in the ground since approximately 1910 to 1920, making them contemporary with Small's disappearance. But the identity of the person remained unknown. DNA testing, which might have resolved the question, was not yet available for forensic use in 1962. The discovery did, however, prompt a wider examination of construction sites and redevelopment areas in downtown Toronto. If one set of old remains had been found, might there be others? Teams of forensic archaeologists worked with city planners to identify locations where construction might uncover evidence. Over the next several years, other old remains were found at various Toronto sites. Each discovery raised hopes that Small had finally been found. Each time, forensic examination ruled out the identification. Toronto, it turned out, had many buried secrets, but none of them seemed to be Ambrose Small. In 1968, John Doughty died in British Columbia at the age of 83. He had lived quietly after his acquittal in 1920, working various jobs, never again involving himself in theater management or high finance. He had married in 1925, raised 2 children, and lived what appeared to be an unremarkable life. Shortly before his death, Doughty gave an interview to a local newspaper reporter who had learned about his connection to the famous case. The reporter asked Doughty what he thought had happened to Ambrose Small. "I honestly don't know," Doughty said. "I've thought about it for nearly 50 years, and I still don't know. Mr. Small was not an easy man to work for. He was hard, sometimes cruel. He had enemies, but did one of them kill him? I can't say. Do you regret running away in December 1919? The reporter asked. Doughty sighed. Every day for the rest of my life. If I had stayed, if I had faced the situation head-on, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I could have helped the investigation. Instead, I made myself look guilty, and I've lived with that shadow ever since. Do you think Small is dead? Yes, I think he died on December 2nd, 1919, or shortly after. I think something happened to him within hours of when I last saw him. But what, or who was responsible, I have no idea. The reporter asked if Doughty had any final thoughts about the case. Anything he wanted to say after all these years. Just this, Doughty replied. I didn't kill Ambrose Small. I didn't steal from him. I was guilty only of panic and poor judgment. I hope someday people believe that, and I hope someday someone discovers what really happened. Everyone deserves the truth, even if it comes too late to matter. Doughty's death sparked a brief resurgence of media interest in the case. Obituaries appeared in newspapers across Canada, recounting the mystery and speculating once again about what might have happened. But no new information emerged. Doughty had taken whatever additional knowledge he might have had to his grave. By the 1980s, advances in forensic science opened new possibilities for investigating cold cases. DNA analysis, computer databases, advanced techniques for examining old evidence. All of these tools could potentially shed light on decades-old mysteries. Toronto police established a cold case unit in 1985, and the Ambrose Small disappearance was one of the first cases they reviewed. Detective Linda Chun, who headed the unit, approached the case with fresh eyes and modern tools. Chun began by organizing all the existing evidence and documentation. This was a massive task. 66 years of investigation had generated thousands of pages of reports, witness statements, photographs, and physical evidence. Some of it had been lost over the years, but much remained in police archives. One of the first things Chin noticed was that the original investigation, thorough as it had been, had lacked some of the systematic approaches that modern police work employed. There had been no central timeline integrating all witness sightings. There had been no comprehensive mapping of locations relevant to the case. There had been no sophisticated analysis of financial records using modern accounting techniques. Chan and her team spent months constructing a detailed timeline, creating maps, analyzing financial data. They used computer databases to cross-reference witness statements, looking for patterns that might have been missed in the original investigation. They also attempted to track down any physical evidence that might yield DNA information. But this proved frustrating. The coat found in the tunnels had been lost at some point in the 1940s. The note discovered in the Grand Opera House wall had been kept, but it was too degraded to provide useful DNA samples. Most of the physical evidence from 1919 had either deteriorated or been misplaced over the decades. Chen did, however, make one interesting discovery. In reviewing the financial records, she found evidence of a payment Small had made in November 1919 to a private detective agency. The payment was for $250, a significant sum at the time. The agency's name was noted in Small's ledger, Carmichael Investigations. Chun tracked down records of Carmichael Investigations. The agency had closed in 1935, but some of its files had been donated to the Toronto City Archives. Chun obtained access to these files and searched for anything related to Ambrose Small. She found a briefcase file dated November 1919. It indicated that Small had hired the agency to follow someone, but frustratingly, the file didn't name who. The notes were cryptic. Subject observed at multiple locations. Report delivered to client verbally. No written record per client request. Who had Small been having followed? His wife, John Dowdy? Someone else? And had this surveillance uncovered something that might have led to his disappearance? There was no way to know. Everyone involved was long dead. In 1995, a Canadian television network produced an hour-long documentary about the Ambrose Small case, using modern production techniques, dramatic reenactments, and interviews with historians and forensic experts. The documentary was titled The Vanishing Millionaire, and it attracted high viewership. The program presented all the major theories, examined the evidence, and concluded, as everyone before had concluded, that the truth remained elusive. But the documentary did include one new element. The producers had commissioned a criminal profiler to analyze the case using modern psychological techniques. The profiler, Dr. Marcus Webb, descendant of the lawyer who had defended John Dowdy, offered some interesting observations based on Small's personality, his business practices, and the circumstances of his disappearance, Dr. Webb suggested that Small had likely been killed by someone he knew and trusted, someone who had access to him, someone who could get close without raising alarm. This wasn't a stranger abduction, Dr. Webb said in the documentary. This wasn't random violence. Ambrose Small was a cautious man, suspicious of people he didn't know. For him to go willingly with someone, to let down his guard enough to be vulnerable, it had to be someone familiar. The question is, who in his circle of associates, employees, and acquaintances had both the motive and the opportunity? The documentary also noted something that had been overlooked in earlier analyses. December 2nd, 1919 was a Tuesday. It was a normal workday, nothing special or unusual about it except for the completion of the theater sale. This suggested that whatever happened to Small wasn't elaborately planned. It was either spontaneous or it was planned to look spontaneous. After the documentary aired, Toronto police received dozens of tips from viewers who thought they had information. Each tip was investigated. Each led nowhere. The problem with a case this old was that virtually all the principals were dead. Even people who had been children in 1919 were now elderly or deceased. Living memory of the event had almost entirely faded. In 2015, nearly a century after Ambrose Small's disappearance, Toronto police made one last concerted effort to solve the case. Using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced technology, they conducted searches of several locations that had been identified in old case files as possibilities for where a body might have been buried. They searched the grounds of Small's former mansion in Rosedale, though the property had changed hands multiple times and had been significantly modified. They searched the former site of the Grand Opera House, now occupied by a modern office building. They searched several properties in Muskoka that had connection to the case, including the farm Small had attempted to purchase. The searches yielded nothing. If Small's body had been buried in any of these locations, it was so well hidden or so thoroughly decomposed that modern technology couldn't detect it. The police also made a renewed appeal for information, asking anyone with family stories or old documents related to the case to come forward. A few people responded with interesting anecdotes. A grandmother who claimed she'd seen a man matching Small's description in the 1920s, a great-uncle who supposedly knew something about the case, but none of it led to concrete evidence. Detective Sarah Mitchell, who led the 2015 investigation, held a press conference to announce the results. "We've done everything that modern forensic science allows us to do," she said. "We've reviewed every document, pursued every lead, used every available technology. And we still don't know what happened to Ambrose Small. Do you think the case will ever be solved?" a reporter asked. Mitchell considered the question carefully. "I think the truth exists," she said. "Somewhere, somehow, there's an explanation for what happened on December 2nd, 1919. But whether we'll ever discover that explanation, I honestly don't know. Too much time has passed. Too many witnesses are gone. Too much evidence has been lost. But we'll keep the file open. We'll never officially give up. Because Ambrose Small deserves to have his story told, even if it takes another 100 years. And so we arrive at the end of our story, though in truth, there is no ending. The mystery of Ambrose Small's disappearance remains unsolved after more than a century." On December 2nd, 1919, a wealthy theater owner walked out of his office into a snowy Toronto evening and vanished. Despite one of the most extensive investigations in Canadian history, despite countless theories and hundreds of leads, despite the efforts of police, private detectives, journalists, authors, and amateur sleuths, we still don't know what happened to him. Was he murdered? Almost certainly. The circumstances suggest that something violent happened within hours of when he was last seen. A man doesn't abandon $1.7 million voluntarily. A man doesn't leave his fortune, his business interests, his entire life without a trace unless he's physically unable to return. But who killed him? That's the question that has haunted investigators for over 100 years. Was it John Doughty, the secretary who fled with the bonds and always remained under suspicion despite his acquittal? Was it Teresa Small, the wife whose marriage had grown cold and who stood to inherit everything? Was it a business rival, someone Small had wronged in his ruthless pursuit of profit? Was it political radicals making a statement about wealth and inequality? Was it common criminals whose kidnapping plot went fatally wrong? Each theory has its adherents. Each has elements that seem plausible, but none has the evidence to transform it from speculation into proven fact. What we do know is this. On the evening of December 2nd, 1919, Ambrose Small's life intersected with someone or something that led to his death. In those few hours between leaving his office and completely disappearing, something happened. A meeting, a confrontation, an accident, an assault. Some event that ended with Small's body being hidden so well that it has never been found. Perhaps it was hidden in Lake Ontario, as many have theorized, sinking to the bottom where it would never be recovered. Perhaps it was buried in a remote location, in an unmarked grave that nature has long since reclaimed. Perhaps it was destroyed entirely, through fire or other means, leaving nothing to find. Perhaps it lies somewhere in Toronto itself, beneath a building or a parking lot or a park, waiting to be discovered by some future construction project. Or perhaps, though this seems increasingly unlikely as the decades pass, there is some other explanation, something no one has yet considered, some angle to the story that has been overlooked by everyone who has examined the case. What is certain is that the mystery has outlived everyone directly connected to it. Ambrose Small is gone. Teresa Small is gone. John Dowdy is gone. Inspector Kennedy and all the detectives who worked the case are gone. The witnesses, the suspects, the people who knew Small personally, all of them have passed into history. We're left only with documents, photographs, and testimonies recorded long ago. The case remains officially open in Toronto police files. If new evidence emerges, if someone discovers old documents or makes a deathbed confession or uncovers a burial site, the investigation will resume. But realistically, after 105 years, the likelihood of solving the case diminishes with each passing year. And so Ambrose Small takes his place alongside other famous unsolved disappearances. People who walked out of their lives and into mystery. His case has been studied, written about, dramatized, analyzed. It has become part of Canadian culture, a story that raises questions about wealth, power, justice, and the nature of truth itself. Perhaps that's the real legacy of Ambrose Small. Not the theaters he built or the fortune he accumulated, but the mystery he left behind. A mystery that reminds us that even in our modern world, with all its surveillance and forensics and technology, it's still possible for a person to disappear without a trace. It reminds us that some questions may never be answered, some truths may never be known. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you might wonder what really happened to Ambrose Small. Your guess is as good as anyone's. The answer lies somewhere in the past, perhaps buried with those who knew the truth, perhaps waiting to be discovered by future generations, perhaps destined to remain forever unknown. The snow has long since melted from that December evening in 1919. The Grand Opera House is gone, replaced by modern buildings. The Toronto that Ambrose Small knew has transformed into a vastly different city. But the question remains, echoing through time, what happened to Ambrose Small? Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with anyone who loves mysteries and true crime. Sleep well wherever you are in the world. And perhaps, in your dreams, you'll solve the mystery that has baffled investigators for over a century. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd like to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how these stories travel across continents and time zones. If you're new here, welcome. We specialize in true crime stories told in a calming voice, accompanied by gentle rain, sounds to help you drift off to sleep. If you enjoy tonight's mystery, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. And if you're feeling generous, a like on this video helps us tremendously. It tells the algorithm to share our content with others who might enjoy it. Feel free to share this with anyone who loves true crime or needs help falling asleep. What time is it where you are? Leave a comment and let me know. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, united by our fascination with the unexplained. Now settle in. Get comfortable. Tonight, we're traveling to the vast landscapes of Alberta, Canada. This is the story of a woman who vanished on an ordinary summer day in 2018. A 29-year-old schoolteacher who left for a morning hike and was never seen again. Despite extensive searches, despite hundreds of volunteers combing the wilderness, despite police investigations that spanned years, Leah Anderson simply ceased to exist. And the question that has haunted her family, her community, and investigators remains. What happened to Leah Anderson? The sun rose over Canmore, Alberta on July 14, 2018, painting the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and amber. It was going to be a beautiful day, the kind of perfect summer morning that draws people to the trails, that makes you grateful to be alive in such spectacular country. Leah Anderson woke early in her small apartment on Railway Avenue, just as she did most Saturday mornings during the summer. At 29, she had established comfortable routines in the 2 years since moving to Canmore from Edmonton. She taught third grade at the local elementary school, spent her weekends hiking, and had built a close circle of friends who shared her love of the mountains. Her roommate, Jessica Chun, would later tell police that Leah seemed completely normal that morning, happy even. She'd made coffee, packed her usual hiking supplies, water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, bear spray. She was wearing her favorite green hiking jacket, black leggings, and well-worn trail runners. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail. "Where are you headed?" Jessica had asked, still groggy, nursing her own coffee at the kitchen table. "Haling Peak," Leah replied, slinging her small backpack over her shoulders. "I want to catch the sunrise view from the top." Jessica checked the clock on the microwave. It was 6:15 a.m. "You're leaving now? You'll miss the sunrise." "It's already up." Leah laughed. "I'll catch the full morning light then. You know what I mean. That perfect golden hour glow." "Going alone?" Jessica asked. This was a question she'd asked before. The mountains could be dangerous and solo hiking carried risks. "Yeah, Amy was supposed to come but she bailed last night. Said her knee was acting up. I'll be fine. It's a popular trail. There'll be other people." "Text me from the summit?" "Of course, and I'll be back by noon. We still on for that movie tonight?" "Absolutely," Jessica said. That was the last conversation anyone would have with Leah Anderson. She walked out of the apartment at approximately 6:20 a.m., climbed into her white Honda Civic, and drove toward the Haling Peak trailhead. Multiple witnesses would later confirm seeing her car in the parking lot that morning. The vehicle had been found there at 2 p.m., right where Leah had left it, keys still hidden under the front driver's side wheel well. A habit she'd developed because she didn't like carrying keys while hiking. But Leah herself was nowhere to be found. When Jessica hadn't heard from Leah by 2 p.m., she'd started to worry. She'd sent several texts. No response. She'd called. The calls went straight to voicemail. By 4 p.m., Jessica's worry had transformed into genuine fear. She called Amy Martinez, Leah's friend who was supposed to have gone on the hike. "Have you heard from Leah?" Jessica asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "No, why? She went hiking, right? She was supposed to text me from the summit. That was hours ago. She's not answering her phone." There was a pause on the other end. "Which trail?" "Aling. That's only about a 2-hour round trip," Amy said, and now her voice carried concern too. "She should have been back ages ago." The two women made some quick calls to other friends, to local emergency contacts. No one had heard from Leah. At 5:30 p.m., Jessica made the call she'd been dreading. She contacted Kananaskis Public Safety, the organization responsible for mountain rescue operations in the area. The dispatcher took down the information calmly, professionally. A 29-year-old experienced hiker, overdue by several hours on Haling Peak. The dispatcher assured Jessica that they would send a team to investigate immediately. What Jessica didn't know was that this call would trigger one of the most extensive search operations in Alberta's history, because Haling Peak, while popular and well-traveled, sits in terrain that can be unforgiving, and experienced hikers can still get into trouble. A twisted ankle can become life-threatening if you're alone. If weather turns, if night falls before you can get back to safety. The initial search team reached the Haling trailhead by 6:45 p.m. They found Leah's car exactly where it was supposed to be. They began hiking up the trail, calling her name, looking for any signs of distress or accident. Other hikers coming down were stopped and questioned. Had anyone seen a woman in a green jacket, hiking alone? Some had. A couple from Calgary said they'd passed a woman matching Leah's description around 7:30 a.m., about halfway up the trail. She'd been hiking at a good pace, had seemed fine, had even smiled and said good morning. A solo male hiker said he'd seen someone who might have been Leah near the summit around 8:15 a.m., though he couldn't be completely certain. There had been several people at the top that morning, and he hadn't paid close attention to individuals. But after that, the sightings stopped. No one remembered seeing Leah coming back down. No one recalled passing her on the descent. It was as if she'd reached the summit and then simply vanished into the mountain air. As darkness fell over the Rockies that evening, search teams with flashlights and headlamps continued combing Haling Peak. They reached the summit, searched the surrounding areas, looked for any sign of where Leah might have gone. They found nothing. No torn clothing caught on branches. No dropped items. No signs of a struggle or a fall. No blood. No disturbed earth. No indication that anything had gone wrong. By midnight, the temperature had dropped to near freezing. If Leah was injured somewhere on the mountain, exposure was becoming a critical concern. The search coordinator made the difficult decision to pull teams back until morning. Searching in darkness on treacherous terrain was too dangerous for the rescuers themselves. They would resume at first light with expanded resources. Jessica Chun spent that night in Leah's apartment, unable to sleep, staring at her phone, willing it to ring with news. But the phone stayed silent. And somewhere out in the vast darkness of the Canadian Rockies, Leah Anderson's fate remained a terrifying unknown. What had happened after she reached the summit? Had she fallen, been injured, taken a wrong turn on the descent, or had something else occurred, something no one had yet considered? The answers lay somewhere in the mountains, but the mountains were keeping their secrets. Dawn broke on July 15, 2018, and with it came a massive mobilization of search resources. Kananaskis Public Safety coordinated with Royal Canadian Mounted Police, local volunteer search and rescue teams, and specialized mountain rescue units from across Alberta. By 7 a.m., over 50 searchers were deployed on and around Ha Ling Peak. The search was methodical and thorough. Teams were assigned specific grid sections. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept the area, looking for any heat signature that might indicate a person. Dog teams trained in finding lost hikers worked the trails and surrounding wilderness. The operation was everything you'd want if someone you loved was missing in the mountains. Professional, comprehensive, relentless. But as hours turned into days, the search yielded nothing. No trace of Leah Anderson. RCMP Corporal David Marsh took over the investigation on the second day. He was an experienced officer who had worked missing persons cases for over 15 years. He knew the statistics. Most lost hikers were found within 48 hours, usually suffering from nothing worse than dehydration and embarrassment. But there were exceptions. Cases where people simply vanished, where the wilderness swallowed them whole. Marsh established a command post at the trailhead parking lot. He interviewed Jessica Chun extensively, trying to understand Leah's state of mind, any recent concerns or unusual behavior. Jessica was adamant. Leah had been completely normal, happy, planning for the future. She just signed a new contract with the school for the upcoming year. She'd been talking about a trip to Japan she wanted to take in the spring. There was no indication she was depressed or contemplating harming herself. Leah loved her life, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. She loved these mountains. She wouldn't just disappear on purpose. Marsh also interviewed Amy Martinez, the friend who was supposed to have accompanied Leah. Amy was racked with guilt. If I'd gone with her, this wouldn't have happened, she kept saying. Whatever happened, it wouldn't have happened if she wasn't alone. Marsh tried to reassure her that she wasn't to blame, but he understood the guilt. In missing persons cases, the people left behind always tortured themselves with what-ifs. The search expanded beyond Ha Ling Peak itself. Nearby trails were examined. Could Leah have gotten disoriented and ended up on a different path? Mount Lawrence Grassy, the Goat Creek Trail, the Spray Lakes area, teams searched them all. Drones equipped with high-resolution cameras photographed vast swaths of terrain, and volunteers examined the images for hours, looking for any anomaly, any splash of color that might be Leah's green jacket. Local news media picked up the story. Television reporters broadcast from the search area. Newspapers ran articles with Leah's photograph, a pretty young woman with warm brown eyes and a bright smile, wearing that green hiking jacket in a photo taken just weeks before her disappearance. The story resonated with people across Canada. She could have been anyone's daughter, sister, friend. The mountain community rallied. Volunteers poured in from across Alberta. Some were experienced search and rescue professionals. Others were simply concerned citizens who wanted to help. At the height of the operation, over 200 people were involved in the search, covering an area of approximately 50 square kilometers. Leah's parents, Richard and Patricia Anderson, drove down from Edmonton on July 16th. Corporal Marsh met with them at the command post, a meeting he would later describe as one of the most difficult of his career. How do you tell parents that their daughter has vanished without a trace? That despite every resource being deployed, despite the best efforts of hundreds of people, you have no answers? Richard Anderson was a retired engineer, analytical and precise. He wanted details, exact search areas, methodologies, what evidence had been found or ruled out. Patricia Anderson, a nurse, asked different questions. Was Leah suffering? Was she scared? Was she calling for help somewhere that no one could hear? Marsh couldn't answer any of their questions satisfactorily. The truth was, he had no idea what had happened to Leah Anderson, and that uncertainty was torture for everyone involved. On July 18th, the fourth day of the search, a small breakthrough occurred. A hiker reported finding a water bottle on a scree slope approximately 300 meters from the Ha Ling Peak summit. The bottle was a distinctive purple color with stickers on it. Jessica identified it immediately. It was Leah's. She'd had that bottle for years, had covered it with stickers from national parks she'd visited. The discovery gave the search teams a specific location to focus on. The scree slope was on the north side of Ha Ling, not on the standard trail route. It was terrain that hikers sometimes traversed if they wanted to explore or were attempting to reach a different viewpoint. But it was also treacherous, loose rock, steep angles, easy to slip on. Teams scoured the area around where the water bottle was found. They looked for signs that Leah had fallen, that there had been a rock slide, that she'd been injured. They rappelled down cliff faces below the scree slope, searching crevices and overhangs where a body might have fallen. They found nothing, no other belongings, no signs of blood or disturbance, just the water bottle sitting on the rocks as if it had been placed there deliberately. How had the bottle ended up there? Had Leah set it down while exploring and then moved on? Had she dropped it while scrambling across the scree? Or had someone else moved it there after the fact? The discovery raised more questions than it answered. As the search entered its second week, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Despite the unprecedented effort, despite the technology and expertise and sheer determination of hundreds of people, Leah Anderson remained missing. The wilderness had taken her, and it was refusing to give her back. On July 25th, after 12 days of intensive searching, Kananaskis Public Safety made the difficult decision to scale back operations. Active searching would be reduced to intermittent follow-up investigations based on any new information. The reality was that they had searched everywhere they could reasonably search. If Leah was on Ha Ling Peak or in the immediate surrounding area, they would have found her. The announcement devastated Leah's family and friends. Scaling back felt like giving up, even though logically they understood that resources were finite, that searchers couldn't stay in the field indefinitely. But emotionally, it felt like abandonment, like they were leaving Leah out there alone. Jessica Chun spoke to reporters, her voice breaking. "Please don't forget about Leah. Please keep looking. She's out there somewhere. She needs to be found. She needs to come home." But where was she? That was the question that tormented everyone involved. If Leah had fallen or been injured on Ha Ling Peak, the searchers would have found evidence. If she'd become lost and disoriented, she would have been located by the aerial searches and thermal imaging. If she'd been attacked by wildlife, a bear or a cougar, there would have been signs of struggle, blood, torn clothing. Instead, there was nothing, just a water bottle on a scree slope and 1,000 unanswered questions. Corporal Marsh lay awake at night, running through possibilities. Had Leah staged her own disappearance? It seemed impossible. Her life was good. She had no debts or troubles that anyone knew of, and her belongings and identification were still in her apartment. Had she been abducted from the mountain? By whom? For what purpose? The timing would have been nearly impossible. She'd been seen near the summit in broad daylight on a popular trail. Abducting someone under those circumstances without witnesses would require remarkable audacity or luck. The most likely scenario, Marsh believed, was that Leah had suffered some kind of accident. Perhaps falling into an area that the searchers had somehow missed, perhaps being buried by a rock slide, perhaps slipping into a crevice or water feature that wasn't visible from above. The mountains were vast and unforgiving. They could hide a person frighteningly well. But believing something and proving it were two different things. Without evidence, without a body, without any concrete indication of what had occurred, the disappearance of Leah Anderson remained an open wound for everyone who knew her and for the community that had tried so hard to bring her home. As the physical search wound down, Corporal Marsh shifted his focus to the investigative aspects of the case. He began digging into Leah's life with the thoroughness that missing persons cases demand. Sometimes, understanding where someone is requires understanding who they are. Leah's digital footprint was examined. Her laptop, her phone records, her social media accounts, all were analyzed by forensic specialists. What they found was exactly what everyone who knew Leah expected: a normal, happy life. Her social media showed hiking photos, pictures with friends, classroom decorations from her teaching job. Her text messages and emails were mundane: plans with friends, communications with family, school-related correspondence. There was no indication of depression, no secret relationships, no hidden debts or threats. The digital investigation revealed nothing except that Leah Anderson had been exactly who she appeared to be: a well-adjusted young woman who loved teaching, loved the outdoors, and had no reason to vanish from her life. But then, in early August, something odd emerged. A woman named Sarah Mitchell contacted the RCMP tip line. She said she'd been hiking on the Spray Lakes Trail on July 14th, the same day Leah disappeared, though on a different trail system about 15 kilometers away. Around 10:30 a.m., she'd encountered a man who had made her uncomfortable. He was just standing off the trail, Sarah told the investigator who called her back. Not hiking, not taking photos, just standing there watching people go by. When I passed him, he didn't acknowledge me or move. He just stared. It gave me the creeps. The investigator asked Sarah to describe the man. Mid-40s, she said. Average height, maybe 5'10". Wearing dark clothing, which was unusual for summer hiking. He'd had a large backpack, bigger than typical for a day hike. And he'd been near a junction where the Spray Lakes Trail connected to several other paths. "Why are you calling now?" the investigator asked. "This was 3 weeks ago. I didn't think it was relevant," Sarah said. "I figured he was just weird, you know? But then I saw the news about that missing teacher, and I started thinking, what if? What if that guy had something to do with it? I know it's probably nothing, but I couldn't stop thinking about it." Marsh took the tip seriously. He had Sarah work with a sketch artist to create a composite of the man she'd seen. The result was distributed to local media and posted on the RCMP's website. The caption read, "Person of interest in Leah Anderson disappearance. If you recognize this individual or saw him on July 14, 2018, please contact RCMP immediately." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people called in, claiming to recognize the man. He was a local. No, he was a tourist. He worked at a gas station in Canmore. No, he was unemployed. He'd been spotted on various trails. He'd been seen in Calgary. He was definitely suspicious. He was probably harmless. Marsh's team investigated each credible lead. Most went nowhere, cases of mistaken identity or vague sightings that couldn't be verified.